The council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of pristine white metal, suspended in the void above Axios Prime. Through the transparent floor, the planet rotated slowly beneath the feet of 847 delegates representing species from across the galaxy. Some walked on legs, others floated in containment fields, and a few existed as energy patterns projected into physical space. They had maintained peace for 10,000 years. They believed nothing could threaten their order. Ambassador June stood at the human podium, his gray hair catching the artificial light. He had served Earth for 30 years, the last 5 here among beings who measured their lives in centuries. They looked at him the way adults might regard a persistent child. His hands gripped the edge of the podium as he prepared to speak, knowing his words would change nothing. The vote had been decided before he entered the chamber. High Arbiter Kira presided from her elevated throne, her insectoid body gleaming with ceremonial metals. Her compound eyes reflected the chamber in 1,000 fragments. She had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Humanity, barely half a century in the council, registered to her as hardly more than an administrative footnote. "The council has heard your protests, Ambassador June," Kara's voice emerged from the translator with mechanical precision. "The Dravic Empire has presented its case. Your colony worlds encroach upon their historical territorial claims. The evidence is clear." June felt anger rise in his chest but kept his voice level. "With respect, Arbiter, those claims are fabricated. New Sol, Haven's Rest, and Prosperity Station were established on uninhabited worlds with full council approval. We have the documentation. The Dravic never contested this until 3 months ago." Commander Vorn of the Dravic Empire rose from his delegation. His scales reflected deep crimson under the lights, and his tail swept the floor with barely contained aggression. He was a warrior in a chamber of diplomats, and he enjoyed the discomfort his presence created. "The human questions my honor. Typical of their primitive understanding. We have maintained detailed records for 3 centuries. These worlds fall within our sphere of influence. The fact that humans lack the historical perspective to comprehend this is not our concern." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several delegates nodded their various appendages in agreement. Humans were newcomers. Ambitious, certainly. Their technology had impressed some observers. But they lacked the weight of history, the authority of age. They were children playing at the adults' table. June pulled up holographic documents, displaying star charts and survey data. "Our initial surveys detected no Dravic presence, no markers, no claims registered with the Council archives. International law, which this Council itself established, recognizes our legitimate settlement rights." International law? Kira's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Ambassador, you speak of 50 years of jurisprudence against 10,000 years of Council tradition. The Dravic Empire has been a cornerstone of galactic stability for millennia. Their word carries considerable weight." "More weight than truth?" June asked quietly. The chamber fell silent. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. One did not question the Arbiter's judgment so directly. Kara's eyes fixed on June with inscrutable intensity. "The Council will vote," she announced. "All in favor of recognizing Dravic territorial rights to the disputed human colonies." The vote display illuminated. Green lights appeared across the chamber like stars emerging at dusk. 844 votes in favor. Only 3 against Earth, and 2 minor species who had learned to fear the precedent of stolen worlds. "The Dravic Empire is granted permission to annex the human settlements," Kara declared. "Humanity has 30 standard days to evacuate 4,500,000 civilians. Failure to comply will result in forced removal." Vorn's satisfaction was visible in the way he held himself. He had won without firing a shot. The Council had handed him 3 entire worlds and dealt a crushing blow to human expansion. Other species would learn from this. Humanity would learn its place. June stood motionless at his podium. Around him, delegates were already rising, considering the matter closed. They had votes to trade, alliances to maintain, their own interests to serve. What happened to one minor species was unfortunate but necessary for the greater order. You've made your decision, June said, his voice cutting through the departing crowd. Something in his tone made them pause. I want every delegate in this chamber to remember this moment. Remember that you were warned. Remember that you chose this path. Kira tilted her head. Are you threatening the council, Ambassador? No, Arbiter. I'm simply making a statement for the record. June gathered his materials with deliberate care. My government will receive your decision. They will consider their response carefully. I suspect many of you believe we will comply. That we'll accept this theft of our worlds because we're too weak or too civilized to resist. And, will you comply? Vorn asked, unable to hide his anticipation of the answer. June met the Dravik commander's eyes. Commander Vorn, members of this council, you've operated under a particular assumption about humanity. You believe that because we sought peace, we are peaceful. Because we chose diplomacy, we are weak. Because we haven't demonstrated our capacity for violence, we lack that capacity. He closed his briefcase and turned to leave. At the chamber door, he stopped and looked back at the assembled delegates. You're about to learn the difference between choosing peace and being incapable of war. History will remember this decision. I hope you can live with what comes next. The ambassador walked out, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Behind him, uncertain murmurs spread among the delegates. Some laughed nervously, dismissing his words as empty bravado. Others felt a chill they couldn't quite explain. Kira watched him go, her ancient mind processing the interaction. In 10,000 years, she had heard countless threats from countless species. They all sounded the same eventually. The humans would comply or they would be crushed. The order would continue. It always did. Commander Vorn was already planning his victory. 30 days to evacuation, then, his fleets would sweep in and claim the worlds. Perhaps he would allow a token human resistance, just enough to make the conquest look legitimate. His soldiers deserved some sport after all. Neither of them understood that they had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. In 30 days, the galaxy would learn what humanity had been quietly preparing for since the moment they joined the Council. Not preparation for peace, though they genuinely hoped for it. Preparation for the moment when peace became impossible. The vote was over. The countdown had begun. And, somewhere in human space, Captain Hannah received the message she had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. The order came through encrypted channels, brief and absolute: prepare for war. Defend New Sol. Make them regret this. She looked at her crew and saw her own determination reflected in their faces. They would not abandon their people. They would not bow. And the galaxy was about to learn why humans studied history so carefully. They remembered what happened to civilizations that grew too comfortable, too arrogant, too certain of their own superiority. The Dravik Empire had 30 days. It wouldn't be enough. The message reached New Sol within hours of the council vote. Governor Miho sat in his office overlooking the capital city, watching the sun set over buildings that humans had built with their own hands. 4 million people called this world home. They had farms and schools and dreams for the future. Now the galaxy expected them to abandon everything because ancient bureaucrats had decided their homes belonged to someone else. His desk display showed incoming calls from every district. Mayors, community leaders, ordinary citizens all asking the same question: what do we do? Miho had been preparing his answer since Ambassador June's warning came through the diplomatic channels 3 days ago. He had hoped the council would see reason. That hope was gone now. He opened a planet-wide broadcast. Within seconds, every screen on New Sol carried his image. This is Governor Miho. By now you've heard about the council vote. The Dravik Empire claims our world. They've given us 30 days to leave. He paused, letting that sink in. I'm here to tell you that I'm not leaving. This is our home. We built it. We earned it. And I will not abandon it because some council bureaucrats decided to play politics with our lives. The broadcast ended. Within an hour, response messages flooded in. 97% of the population voted to stay. The 3% who wanted to evacuate were given transport off-world with no judgment. Everyone else began preparing for what came next. Captain Hannah stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, humanity's largest warship. Around her, 46 other ships took up defensive positions around New Sol. Her fleet was small by galactic standards. The Dravik would bring hundreds of vessels. Military analysts gave her a 12% chance of victory using conventional projections. Those analysts didn't know everything. Neither did the Dravik. Status report, Hannah commanded. Her executive officer checked his displays. All ships in position. Defense platforms online. Drone carriers loaded and ready. The civilian population is moving to underground shelters as planned. Communication from Admiral Salmon, the communications officer reported. Hannah's mentor appeared on screen. Admiral Salmon had trained her, promoted her, and trusted her with this mission. The old woman's face showed the weight of command. Hannah, the Fifth Fleet is 2 days away if you need reinforcements. Earth is mobilizing everything we have. Understood, Admiral. I don't think we'll need them. Salmon allowed herself a slight smile. Confidence is good. Overconfidence gets people killed. It's not overconfidence when you know something they don't, Hannah replied. We've been preparing for this fight since we joined the council. They still think we're primitives playing with hand-me-down technology. Show them otherwise, Captain. The whole galaxy is watching. The transmission ended. Hannah looked at her crew. They were young, most of them. They'd trained for combat but never experienced real battle. In a few days, that would change. Listen up. What we do here matters beyond New Sol. Every species in the galaxy will judge humanity by our actions. We have a choice: back down and prove we're weak, or stand our ground and prove we belong here. What are our rules of engagement? Her weapons officer asked. Simple. They fire first, we end it fast. Minimal human casualties, maximum enemy destruction. We're not here to fight fair. We're here to win. The days counted down. Diplomatic channels remained active, but the messages were formalities. The Dravik fleet assembled at the edge of the system, 500 warships, the largest punitive force deployed in Council space in centuries. They wanted everyone to see what happened to species who defied the established order. Commander Vorn transmitted his demands from his flagship. Human vessels, you are in violation of Council decree. Withdraw immediately or face destruction. Hannah studied the tactical display. 500 Dravik ships surrounded her 47. The math looked impossible. It would have been impossible if they were playing the same game. Commander Vorn, this is Captain Hannah of the Human Defense Fleet. We reject your illegal claim to New Sol. These people are under our protection. If you attack, you accept full responsibility for the consequences. Vorn's laugh echoed across the channel. Your bravery is admirable but foolish. You have 1 hour to reconsider. Hannah muted the channel and turned to her tactical officer. Yuna, status on the surprise package? Yuna, the fleet's tactical AI specialist, smiled. 10,000 drones ready for deployment. Stealth systems operational. Railgun batteries charged. They won't know what hit them. Good. When they attack, and they will, we make the first 30 seconds count. After that, it's about discipline and following the plan. The hour passed. Governor Miho broadcast from New Sol's capital, standing on the steps of the government building with thousands of citizens behind him. We will not abandon our homes. We will not bow to threats. This is our line in the sand. The transmission reached the Dravik fleet. Vorn had expected fear, pleading, last-minute negotiations. Instead, he saw defiance from a species that should know better. All ships, commence attack. Destroy the human fleet, then, begin orbital bombardment of military targets. Show them the cost of resistance. The Dravik fleet surged forward, their weapons systems lighting up space with targeting locks. 500 ships against 47. The outcome seemed predetermined. Military observers from a dozen species watched from safe distances, recording data for analysis. Some felt pity for the humans. Others saw this as a necessary lesson. None expected what happened next. Hannah waited until the Dravik ships crossed into weapons range. Now, she said quietly. The space around New Sol suddenly filled with 10,000 objects. The Dravik targeting systems went haywire, trying to track threats that appeared from nowhere. They weren't debris or decoys. They were autonomous combat drones, each one loaded with kinetic penetrators and guided by distributed AI networks that made them nearly impossible to jam. What is this? Vorn demanded as alarms shrieked across his bridge. His shields absorbed the first impacts, then the second, then began failing under concentrated fire from hundreds of drones that swarmed his flagship like angry insects. Hannah's ships decloaked. The Dravik had assumed human stealth technology was primitive, barely functional. They were wrong. 7 human destroyers appeared within point-blank range of Dravik capital ships and opened fire with weapons the galaxy had dismissed as obsolete. Railguns. Kinetic weapons. Chunks of metal accelerated to relativistic speeds. The Dravik had optimized their shields against energy weapons, plasma cannons, particle beams, laser batteries. Their shields barely slowed the railgun rounds that punched through hulls like paper. The first Dravik ships began exploding. Then, more. Within 5 minutes, the careful formation dissolved into chaos. Within 10 minutes, 100 ships were disabled or destroyed. Vorn's tactical officer was screaming numbers that made no sense. Human casualties? Hannah asked calmly. 2 ships with minor damage. 0 fatalities, her executive officer reported. Their casualties? 117 ships destroyed. 43 disabled. They're breaking formation. Vorn finally understood. This wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. All ships, retreat. Fall back to the rally point. But Hannah had planned for that too. 3 more human squadrons decloaked behind the Dravik fleet, cutting off escape routes. The trap was complete. Open a channel, Hannah ordered. Her face appeared on every Dravik ship. Commander Vorn, I'm offering you one chance to surrender. Power down your weapons, prepare to be boarded, and your crews will be treated according to the rules of war. Refuse, and we'll finish this. Vorn looked at his tactical display. 300 of his ships remained combat capable, but morale was shattered. His officers were looking at him with fear in their eyes. Pride demanded he fight on. Survival demanded he accept reality. We surrender, he said, the words tasting like poison. The battle ended 27 minutes after it began. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as human marines boarded Dravik vessels and took control without resistance. The great Dravik Empire, conquerors of 40 worlds, had been humiliated by a species they'd called primitive. Admiral Salmon's message came through moments later. Outstanding work, Captain. But, you know, this is just the beginning. Hannah did know. The Dravik wouldn't accept this defeat. The Council would demand explanations. And, somewhere in the galaxy, other species were reconsidering every assumption they'd made about humanity. The line had been drawn. The first blood had been spilled. And, the message was clear, humanity would defend its own, regardless of the cost. News of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than lightspeed communications. Every species with access to the galactic network saw the footage. The images were clear and undeniable, human ships destroying a Dravik fleet 10 times their size with minimal casualties. Military analysts ran the numbers again and again, certain they had made calculation errors. They hadn't. On the Dravik homeworld, the High Command convened an emergency session. The chamber filled with furious voices as generals and admirals demanded explanations. How had a minor species destroyed their finest fleet? Where had the humans acquired such technology? And, most importantly, what did this mean for the Empire's reputation? Fleet Admiral Tarek slammed his clawed hand on the conference table. One battle does not decide a war. Commander Vorn underestimated them. We will not make that mistake again. He turned to his intelligence officers. What do we know about human military capabilities? Very little, Admiral, the intelligence chief admitted. They've been members of the Council for 50 years but remained largely isolated. They participated in joint exercises but never revealed their full capabilities. Our analysts believed their technology was derivative of Council designs. Clearly, your analysts were wrong, Tarek growled. Assemble the second and third fleets. 300 ships. Full battle configuration. We crush them before they can consolidate their position. Back at New Seoul, Captain Hanna watched the prisoner transfers with mixed feelings. Commander Vorn stood in the detention area of the Indomitable, his scales having lost their bright crimson color. Defeat had aged him somehow. She approached his cell, and he looked up with eyes that held both hatred and grudging respect. You knew, Vorn said. Before the battle even started, you knew how it would end. We prepared for every possibility, Hanna replied. Your empire has a reputation for aggression. We studied your tactics, your technology, your strategic doctrine. Then, we built weapons designed specifically to counter your advantages. The Council will not allow this. They'll sanction you, isolate you. The Council authorized you to steal our worlds. They lost their moral authority when they took that vote. Hanna turned to leave, then paused. Commander, I want you to understand something. We didn't want this war. We came to the Council seeking peaceful cooperation. Your empire, backed by the Council's corruption, forced our hand. What happens next is on them, not us. Vorn said nothing. What could he say? The humans had given them every chance to back down, and his people had chosen violence. Now they were learning the cost of that choice. 3 days later, the second Dravik fleet arrived. 300 warships under Fleet Admiral Tarek's direct command. They emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system and found something waiting for them, a message buoy transmitting on all frequencies. The recording showed Captain Hanna standing on her bridge. Behind her, the view screens displayed the wreckage of Vorn's fleet drifting in orbit. I am Captain Hanna of the Human Defense Fleet. You're watching footage of what happened to your first fleet. They came to take our world. They fired first. We finished it. She paused, letting that sink in. You can turn back now, or you can join them. The choice is yours. But, understand this, we are done being pushed around. We are done accepting Council decisions that violate our rights. You want our worlds? Come take them. We'll be waiting. Admiral Tarek sneered at the recording. Bravado from a species that got lucky once. All ships, advance. Battle Formation Alpha. Destroy any human vessels on sight. The fleet moved forward, their sensors sweeping space for threats. Tarek had learned from Vorn's defeat. His ships maintained tight formation with overlapping shield coverage. His point defense systems were recalibrated to handle kinetic threats. He had accounted for everything the humans had shown. He hadn't accounted for what they hadn't shown. The human fleet appeared on his sensors. 70 ships this time, reinforcements having arrived from Earth. Still outnumbered more than 4 to 1. Tarek allowed himself satisfaction. Target their capital ships. Concentrated fire. Leave nothing but wreckage. His weapons officers locked on targets and fired. Plasma bolts and particle beams lanced across space toward the human vessels. They should have connected. They didn't. The human ships moved with impossible agility, their AI-assisted maneuvering systems predicting Dravik fire patterns and adjusting microseconds before impact. What shots did connect splashed harmlessly against shield technology that shouldn't exist. The humans had maintained radio silence about certain advancements, and adaptive shielding was one of them. Return fire, Hannah ordered calmly. This time, the humans didn't just use railguns. They unveiled weapons that made the Dravik sensors scream warnings. Missiles that split into dozens of submunitions, each one tracking a different target. Energy weapons that didn't just pierce shields but fed on them, growing stronger with each impact. Electronic warfare systems that jammed Dravik communications and fed false data to their tactical computers. And the drones. Thousands upon thousands of drones that learned from the first battle, adapted their tactics, and swarmed enemy ships like a plague. Tarek watched his carefully planned formation dissolve into chaos within minutes. His flagship shuddered under concentrated fire. Impossible. Their technology level doesn't allow for this. Tae-Yan, the chief weapons officer on the Indomitable, allowed himself a grim smile as he coordinated the assault. That's what happens when you underestimate an entire species. He fired another railgun volley, the magnetic accelerators launching projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. 3 Dravik cruisers exploded simultaneously. Yuna, monitoring the tactical AI network, watched her drones execute their programming with lethal efficiency. She had spent 2 years developing the distributed intelligence system that allowed them to fight as a single organism. The Dravik had nothing like it. Their ships fought as individuals, while the human drones and ships fought as one. The battle lasted 37 minutes. It felt longer to the Dravik crews who survived. When the firing stopped, 260 Dravik ships were destroyed or disabled. 40 more had managed to retreat, fleeing in disorder. The human fleet had lost 3 ships with total casualties of 847 personnel. The galaxy watched in real time as the impossible happened again. Not luck. Not a fluke. Systematic destruction of a force that should have won easily. The implications rippled across Council space like shock waves. On Axios Prime, High Arbiter Kira received the battle reports with growing disbelief. She summoned her military advisors, demanding explanations. How is this possible? Our intelligence showed human technology to be at least a century behind current standards. Her chief military advisor pulled up comparison data. Arbiter, we were deceived. The humans deliberately hid their capabilities. They participated in joint exercises using outdated equipment while developing advanced systems in secret. They let us underestimate them. Why would they do that? Because they learned from history, Arbiter. Every species that revealed its full military capacity early became a target. The humans studied our political structure, identified the corruption and favoritism, and prepared for the inevitable moment when the Council would turn on them. Kira felt something she hadn't experienced in centuries: fear. If they can defeat the Dravik this easily, what else are they capable of? The answer came sooner than she expected. Admiral Salmon, now commanding humanity's combined fleets, transmitted a message to the Council. The old woman's face appeared on screens across the galaxy. Members of the Galactic Council, the Dravik Empire has attacked human territory twice without provocation. Both times they were defeated. Now humanity will seek appropriate compensation for this aggression. The word compensation sent chills through the Council chambers. It was diplomatic language for conquest. Salmon continued, we will be claiming 12 Dravik military installations as reparations. Any attempt to defend these facilities will be met with overwhelming force. You authorized them to attack us. Now accept the consequences of that decision. The transmission ended. The galaxy held its breath. The Dravik Empire, which had dominated its region of space for 3 centuries, was about to learn what happens when you pick a fight with someone who prepared for war while hoping for peace. Back on Earth, Ambassador June prepared for his return to the Council chambers. He had recordings, evidence of corruption, and a list of demands that would reshape the galactic order. The Council had tested humanity and found them wanting in subservience. They would soon discover that what they found was strength, determination, and a complete unwillingness to accept subjugation. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. And, this time, humanity wasn't playing defense. Admiral Salmon stood in the command center of Earth's orbital defense station, watching the tactical displays that showed human fleets moving across multiple systems simultaneously. 50 years of careful preparation was now being unleashed in a coordinated offensive that military historians would study for generations. She had hoped it would never come to this. The Dravik Empire had given her no choice. "Status report," she commanded. Her operations officer highlighted 12 points on the galactic map. "All strike groups are in position. The Dravik detected our fleet movements 6 hours ago, but they're scrambling to respond. Their military installations weren't designed to face this level of coordinated assault. Rules of engagement remain unchanged," Salmon stated clearly. "Military targets only. Any civilian casualties are to be avoided even if it complicates our objectives. We're not conquerors. We're making a point." That point was being made forcefully across 4 Dravik systems. Human fleets appeared at military shipyards, supply depots, and command stations with surgical precision. The attacks weren't about destruction for its own sake. They were about demonstrating capability and resolve. Commander Hyun led the ground assault on the Dravik homeworld's orbital defense grid. His transport ships dropped through the atmosphere carrying mechanized armor units that the galaxy had never seen humans deploy. The Dravik defenders expected conventional ground forces. What they got was something else entirely. The human mech stood 12 feet tall, operated by pilots in Neuralink systems that made the machines extensions of their own bodies. They moved with impossible fluidity, their weapons systems tied into the same tactical AI networks that coordinated the fleet actions. The Dravik ground forces, veterans of 40 planetary conquests, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Hyun's voice came across the command channel as his unit secured the main control station. "Orbital defense grid is ours. Total time, 6 hours, 12 minutes. Enemy casualties minimal, mostly from those who refused to surrender. Our casualties, 14 wounded, none critical." On the Dravik homeworld below, panic spread through the capital city. The defense grid that had protected them for centuries was in enemy hands. Human ships controlled their orbit. Yet no bombardment came. No demands for surrender. The humans simply held position and waited. The Dravik High Command met in their underground bunker, facing a reality they couldn't comprehend. Fleet Admiral Tarek, who had survived the second battle at New Seoul, stood before his superiors with defeat written across his face. "We have no effective response. Every military asset we send against them is destroyed or captured. Their technology exceeds ours in every category that matters. Surely we have allies," the Supreme Commander insisted. "The Council cannot allow this aggression to stand." "The Council is in disarray," Tarek replied bitterly. "Half the member species are quietly congratulating the humans. The other half are too afraid to intervene. And, the corruption investigation has paralyzed any unified response." That investigation was being led by Ambassador June, who had returned to Axios Prime with evidence that shocked even the most cynical observers. The council chambers, usually filled with diplomatic pleasantries and careful political maneuvering, had become something more like a criminal court. June stood at the center of the chamber, holographic displays showing financial records, communication logs, and testimony from whistleblowers. 15 council delegates accepted bribes from the Dravik Empire to support their territorial claims. 7 more voted in favor due to political pressure and threats. The vote that authorized the theft of human worlds wasn't a legitimate council decision. It was a criminal conspiracy. High Arbiter Kira watched her carefully constructed political order crumble. Delegates who had served for centuries were being led away under guard. Species that had supported the vote now scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. And, through it all, the humans pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency. Ambassador June, Kara's voice cut through the chaos. "Humanity has made its point. You've exposed corruption and demonstrated your military superiority. What do you want?" June turned to face her, his expression calm but his eyes hard. "What do I want, Arbiter? I want a council that actually upholds the principles it claims to represent. I want justice for the 4 million people who were told their homes could be stolen by bureaucratic decree. I want reforms that prevent this from ever happening again. And if the council refuses? Then, humanity will leave the council and form our own alliance. We're already in discussions with 17 other species who are tired of being treated as second-class members. The choice is yours: reform or watch your authority fragment into irrelevance. The thread hung in the air. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council had been the ultimate authority. Now a species that had joined barely 5 decades ago was dictating terms. Some delegates bristled at the audacity. Others, mostly representatives of smaller species, looked at June with something like hope. On the Dravik homeworld, Commander Vorn found himself in an unexpected position. He was being released. Human Marines escorted him to a transport ship where Captain Hannah waited. The woman who had defeated him twice now stood before him without visible weapons or guards, confident in her authority. "You're free to go, Commander," Hannah said. "We're returning all prisoners of war to Dravik custody." Vorn stared at her in confusion. "Why? You defeated us. Humiliated us. Now you show mercy?" "This was never about humiliation," Hannah replied. "It was about defending our people and making it clear that we won't be victims. Your empire attacked us. We defended ourselves and took appropriate measures to ensure it doesn't happen again. But we're not interested in occupation or revenge. The Council will see this as weakness. Let them. We know the difference between strength and cruelty. You'll return home and tell your leaders what you've seen. Human technology. Human tactics. Human resolve. And, hopefully, they'll understand that peaceful coexistence is preferable to continued conflict." Vorn boarded the transport, his mind struggling to process everything that had happened. The humans had every tactical advantage, yet they chose restraint. They could have bombarded the homeworld, but they'd only seized military assets. They could have executed prisoners, but they'd treated them according to international law. It didn't match his understanding of how victorious species behaved. The transport departed, and Hannah watched it go. Her executive officer approached, looking uncertain. "Captain, was that wise? Releasing him gives them intelligence on our operations." "They already know what they need to know," Hannah said. "We're strong enough to defeat them but disciplined enough to limit our actions. That's a more powerful message than any amount of brutality could send." Back on Axios Prime, the Council had reached a breaking point. Arbiter Kira called for a vote on emergency reforms. The old guard wanted to maintain the status quo, but their authority was shattered. The corruption scandal had exposed the rot at the system's core, and the smaller species had found their voice. Ambassador June presented his reform package. Council decisions affecting specific species would require approval from those species. Votes would require a 75% majority rather than simple majority. An independent tribunal would investigate corruption charges. And the Council's authorization of military action would require unanimous consent except in cases of verified aggression. The debate lasted 18 hours. Delegates argued, threatened, pleaded, and bargained. In the end, the reforms passed by a narrow margin. Not because the powerful species wanted change, but because they realized the alternative was watching the Council collapse entirely. June received the news with quiet satisfaction. It wasn't a complete victory. The reforms had loopholes, and enforcement would be a constant battle. But it was progress. Real, meaningful change that would protect species like humanity from being victimized by political favoritism and corruption. Admiral Salmon ordered the fleet to stand down. The 12 Dravik installations would be returned gradually as part of a negotiated settlement. The Dravik Empire would pay reparations to New Sol and formally recognize human territorial rights. And, most importantly, they would sign a non-aggression pact with humanity and its growing list of allies. The war was over. Not through total victory or unconditional surrender, but through a demonstration of power tempered by restraint. Humanity had proven it could fight and win. More importantly, it had proven it would fight only when necessary and stop when objectives were achieved. On Earth, the celebrations were muted. 4,000 human lives had been lost in the conflict. Every one of them had families, dreams, futures that would never be realized. Victory came at a cost, and the leaders who ordered the military action would carry that weight forever. Governor Miho stood on the steps of New Seoul's Capitol building, now surrounded by a growing city that had survived its trial by fire. "We held the line," he told the gathered crowd. "We proved that our homes, our lives, our freedom are worth defending. Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can take what's ours without consequence." The galaxy had learned that lesson. The question now was whether they would remember it. 6 months after the war ended, the Galactic Council looked nothing like it had before. The Grand Chamber remained the same, but the dynamics had shifted in ways that 10,000 years of tradition could not prevent. Ambassador June walked through corridors where delegates now nodded respectfully rather than dismissively. Fear and respect were uncomfortable companions, but he had learned to accept both. The formal ceremony marked the Dravic Empire's final reparation payment. Commander Vorn, who had somehow managed to retain his rank despite the defeats, stood at the Dravic podium and read from a prepared statement. The Dravic Empire formally recognizes all human territorial claims and apologizes for unlawful military aggression. We commit to peaceful relations and acknowledge the sovereignty of human-controlled space. The words clearly tasted like ash in his mouth, but he spoke them anyway. Across the chamber, representatives from 17 other species watched with keen interest. They had formed what they called the Free Worlds Coalition, with humanity as its de facto leader. Not through conquest or coercion, but through the simple fact that humans had done what they could not, stood up to the Council's established powers and won. High Arbiter Kira no longer held her position. She had resigned in disgrace after the corruption investigation revealed her personal involvement in several bribery schemes. Her replacement was a coalition of 5 species who rotated the leadership role monthly. It was messy and inefficient, but it prevented any single entity from accumulating too much power. June addressed the council after Vorn finished. The Dravic Empire has fulfilled its obligations under the peace treaty. Humanity considers this matter closed. We harbor no ongoing hostility and hope for productive relations in the future. It was diplomatic language, carefully crafted to sound conciliatory while offering no real warmth. The Dravic had earned distrust that would take generations to overcome. But the gesture mattered. It showed that humanity could win decisively and still choose peace over perpetual conflict. After the session ended, June met with the young diplomat who would eventually replace him. Dian was barely 30, brilliant and idealistic in ways that reminded June of his younger self. They walked through the observation deck, looking down at Axios Prime rotating below. "Do you think it will last?" Dian asked. "The reforms, the coalition, the new balance of power?" "Nothing lasts forever," June replied. "The question is whether it lasts long enough to create better institutions. We've shown that the old system was broken. Now comes the harder work of building something better. Some of the older species still resent us. They think we're too aggressive, too willing to use military force. Let them think what they want. We know the truth, we wanted peace and worked for it. When peace became impossible, we defended ourselves. That's not aggression. That's survival." Meanwhile, Captain Hannah had returned to Earth for a very different ceremony. The military headquarters in Geneva was packed with officers, politicians, and families of those who had died in the war. She stood before a memorial wall where 4,000 names were engraved in stone, each one representing a life cut short by conflict. Admiral Salmon stood beside her, both women in full dress uniform. "They gave their lives so that billions could keep their homes," Salmon said quietly. "That's worth remembering." "I remember every one," Hannah replied. "Every ship that didn't come home. Every family notification I had to approve. Victory doesn't erase that." "No, but it gives their sacrifice meaning. New Seoul stands because they stood. Humanity has a voice in the galaxy because they were willing to fight for it."
The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence, followed by the reading of names. It took hours.
Hannah remained standing for all of it, listening to each name, remembering faces and moments from the brief war that had changed everything. Later, she met with her former weapons officer Tae-young, who had been promoted to captain of his own ship. They sat in a quiet cafe overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching the sunset paint the sky in orange and red.
"Strange, isn't it?" Tae-young said.
"6 months ago we were fighting for survival.
Now we're the ones everyone's afraid of." "Fear isn't respect," Hannah reminded him. "And it's not sustainable."
"Eventually, we need to prove that we can be good neighbors, not just dangerous enemies."
"The coalition species seem to think we can be both." "That's the hope. Strong enough to protect our interests, wise enough to cooperate when possible." She paused, watching a cargo ship rise into the evening sky. "The next generation will have different challenges. They won't have to prove humanity belongs in the galaxy.
They'll have to prove we deserve to stay."
On New Sol, the reconstruction was nearly complete.
Governor Miho walked through streets that had been reinforced with military-grade materials during the siege. The city had grown since the war, its population swelling with immigrants from other human worlds and even a few aliens who saw opportunity in humanity's rising status. He stopped at a monument in the central square. It showed a simple image, humans of all ages standing together, looking toward the stars.
The inscription read, "We held the line."
No mention of specific battles or leaders.
Just a reminder of collective determination.
A young girl approached him, maybe 10 years old, holding a datapad with a school assignment.
"Governor Miho? I have to write about the war for history class. Can I ask you something?"
"Of course."
"My teacher says we won because we had better weapons. But my dad says we won because we didn't give up. Which is right?" Miho smiled. "Both are true. We had technology that surprised our enemies, yes. But technology alone doesn't win wars. People win wars.
People who refuse to accept defeat, who protect each other, who remember what they're fighting for."
"Your dad is right. We won because we didn't give up."
The girl nodded seriously and ran off to finish her assignment.
Miho watched her go, thinking about the galaxy she would grow up in.
One where humanity was respected, even feared. But also one where the rules had changed, where smaller species had more voice, where corruption faced consequences.
Back on Axios Prime, the Free Worlds Coalition held its first official assembly.
17 species, ranging from humans to beings that existed as crystal and matrices, gathered to discuss common interests and mutual defense. They had no formal military alliance yet, but the implication was clear: attack one, face all of them. June chaired the meeting, still uncomfortable with the leadership role thrust upon him.
"We need to establish clear principles," he said. "We're not forming this coalition to dominate others.
We're creating a structure where member species can protect their interests and support each other without being subject to arbitrary council decisions."
A delegate from one of the smaller species raised a tentacle in question. "What happens when the council opposes our actions?"
"They still have significant military capacity."
"Then, we negotiate. We're not trying to destroy the council. We're trying to reform it from within while maintaining our independence. Think of us as a counterbalance, not a revolution."
The discussion continued for hours, hammering out protocols and agreements. It was messy and frustrating, but it was also genuine cooperation between equals. The old council had been hierarchical, with powerful species dominating weaker ones. This new coalition was horizontal, with each member having equal voice regardless of military or economic power.
Admiral Salmon watched the proceedings from Earth through secure transmission. Her aide asked if she thought the coalition would survive its first crisis.
"Every alliance is tested," she replied. "The question is whether they remember why they formed it."
Humanity learned that lesson the hard way.
We chose peace and were punished for it.
Then, we chose war and won.
Now we're choosing something harder, building a system where neither choice is necessary. Commander Hyun, now promoted to general and placed in charge of coalition military coordination, was already planning joint exercises with coalition forces. Not to prepare for conquest, but to ensure they could defend each other if threatened. The exercises revealed significant capability gaps between species, but also opportunities for cooperation. The idea is simple, Hyun explained to his staff. Each species contributes what they do best. Humans provide advanced weapon systems and tactical coordination. The Kelver contribute their superior sensors. The PRYNN offer their shield technology. Together, we're stronger than any of us individually. It was a philosophy that applied beyond military matters. The coalition began coordinating on trade, scientific research, and diplomatic initiatives. They weren't trying to replace the council, but they were creating an alternative power structure that couldn't be ignored. High in orbit above Earth, a new station was being constructed. It would serve as coalition headquarters, a neutral ground where member species could meet, negotiate, and coordinate. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Humanity, once dismissed as primitive newcomers, now anchored an alliance that challenged 10,000 years of galactic order. Dian visited the construction site, watching robots and workers assemble the massive structure. She would be stationed here after her training completed, helping to manage the day-to-day operations of the coalition. It was a responsibility that would have been unimaginable just a year ago. Nervous? June asked, appearing beside her at the observation window. Terrified, she admitted. What if we can't maintain this? What if the old powers find a way to divide us or the coalition fractures from internal disagreements? Then, we adapt and continue. The galaxy won't transform overnight. Real change takes generations. We're just planting seeds and hoping they take root. Do you think our children will look back on this time and understand what we were trying to do? June smiled. I think they'll probably criticize our mistakes and improve on our successes. That's how progress works. We do the best we can, and the next generation does better. On the memorial wall at military headquarters, new names were being added. Not casualties of war, but remembrances of those who had served and since passed from age or accident. The wall would grow over the years, a permanent record of those who had fought for humanity's place in the stars. Captain Hannah visited it regularly, sometimes bringing flowers, sometimes just standing in silence. The weight of command never truly left her. She had made decisions that cost lives, even in victory. That responsibility would be with her always. But she also saw what those sacrifices had achieved. Human colonies were secure. The council had reformed, however, reluctantly. A new generation was growing up in a galaxy where humanity was respected, not dismissed. That was worth the cost, even if the price had been terrible. The galaxy had learned a lesson that would echo through the centuries: humanity was not a species to be underestimated or pushed around. They preferred peace but would wage war with brutal efficiency when necessary. More importantly, they could win and still choose restraint, defeat enemies and still offer reconciliation. It wasn't the galaxy anyone had expected 6 months ago. But it was the galaxy that existed now, shaped by human determination and the brutal retribution they had delivered to those who threatened their people. The shock waves from those events would ripple outward for generations, changing everything they touched. And, in the quiet moments, when the ceremonies ended and the politicians stopped talking and the military returned to routine duties, humanity remembered a simple truth: they had drawn a line and held it. Whatever came next, that fact would never change.